The Road to Character by David Brooks. Picture this. It's August 15th, 1945, the day after victory in Japan Day. World War II, one of history's most devastating conflicts, has finally ended. A radio show called Command Performance is broadcasting to the troops, featuring the biggest names of the era: Frank Sinatra, Cary Grant, Bette Davis. But when host Bing Crosby opens the show, there's no chest beating, no triumphant roaring, just a quiet, reflective tone. "Well, it looks like this is it," he says. "What can you say at a time like this? You can't throw your skimmer in the air. That's for run-of-the-mill holidays. I guess all anybody can do is thank God it's over." He goes on to say that the deep-down feeling isn't pride, but humility. Think about that for a second. They'd just been part of one of the noblest military victories in history, and their first instinct was to remind themselves they weren't morally superior to anyone else. They instinctively warned themselves against pride. Now fast forward a few decades. Picture a football game. A defensive player makes a routine tackle for a 2-yard gain. What does he do? He leaps to his feet, pounds his chest, and performs an elaborate victory dance for the cameras. David Brooks, the author we're exploring today, witnessed this exact contrast. He heard more self-celebration after a 2-yard gain than after winning World War II. And it sparked a profound question: what changed? This small moment symbolized a massive cultural shift, from a culture of self-effacement and quiet humility to a culture of self-promotion, what he calls the big me. David Brooks is one of our time's most insightful observers of culture and human nature. He's a columnist for the New York Times and a teacher at Yale. But this book, The Road to Character, isn't just academic analysis. It's deeply personal. He confesses that for most of his life he felt a certain shallowness. He was born, as he puts it, with a disposition toward it. He felt he was living a life of vague moral aspiration, wanting to be good but lacking a clear map of how to get there. He realized that our society gives us 1,000 strategies for building a great career, but almost none for building a great soul. So he set out on a journey to rediscover a lost moral tradition, a roadmap for building the kind of inner strength and depth that seems so rare today. This book became a #1 New York Times bestseller because it taps into a hunger we all feel, a hunger for something deeper than just success. So what is this road to character? What's the secret to building an inner life that's as strong and impressive as your external one? That's the promise of our journey today. By the end of our time together, you'll understand the profound difference between the two sides of your nature, and you'll have a map, drawn from the lives of some of history's most remarkable individuals, showing you how to cultivate the part of you that truly matters in the end. Let's start with a simple but powerful distinction that David Brooks introduces right at the beginning. He asks us to think about the difference between what he calls the resume virtues and the eulogy virtues. The resume virtues are the skills you list on your resume. They're the things that make you successful in the marketplace: your talents, your achievements, the things that contribute to your external success. Our entire education system, from kindergarten to college, is designed to help you build these resume virtues. But then there are the eulogy virtues. These are deeper. They're the things people will talk about at your funeral. Were you kind? Were you brave, honest, or faithful? What kind of relationships did you build? Did you live a life of integrity and love? These exist at the core of your being. Now, if you ask anyone which of these is more important, almost everyone will say the eulogy virtues. But if we're honest, most of us, including Brooks himself, spend far more time thinking about and developing our resume virtues. We have clear strategies for getting ahead in our careers, but our strategies for building profound character are often fuzzy and vague. To understand this tension, Brooks borrows a powerful idea from a 1965 book called Lonely Man of Faith by Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik. Soloveitchik points out that the book of Genesis gives two different accounts of Adam's creation, and he argues these represent the two opposing sides of our nature. He calls them Adam 1 and Adam 2. Adam 1 is the external, ambitious, career-oriented side of us. This is the resume Adam. Adam 1 wants to build, create, produce, and discover things. He wants to achieve high status, win victories, and conquer the world. His motto is success. He lives by a straightforward, economic logic. Input leads to output. Effort leads to reward. Practice makes perfect. Impress the world. Adam 2 is the internal Adam. He isn't focused on what he does, but on who he is. He wants to embody moral qualities. He wants to be good, to have a serene inner character, a quiet but solid sense of right and wrong. While Adam 1 wants to conquer the world, Adam 2 wants to serve it. His motto is charity, love, and redemption. And here's the crucial part. Adam 2 lives by a completely different, almost inverse logic. It's a moral logic, not an economic one. In Adam 2's world, you have to give to receive. You have to surrender to something outside yourself to gain strength within yourself. You have to conquer your desire to get what you crave. In this world, success can lead to the greatest failure, which is pride. And failure can lead to the greatest success, which is humility and learning. To fulfill yourself, you have to forget yourself. To find yourself, you have to lose yourself. Brooks argues that we're all born with both Adams inside us, and they're forever in tension. The challenge of life is to live within this self-confrontation, to honor both sides of our nature. But the problem is, our modern culture is almost entirely built to feed and celebrate Adam 1, while it starves and neglects Adam 2. We live in a society that screams messages at us from every direction. You are special. Trust yourself. Be true to yourself. Think about the movies you watch, the commencement speeches you hear. They all tell you to follow your passion, don't accept limits, chart your own course. As celebrity chef Mario Batali told graduates, follow your own truth. This is what Brooks calls the culture of the big me, a world that encourages us to see ourselves as the center of the universe. And the data backs this up. In 1950, the Gallup poll asked high school seniors if they considered themselves a, quote, very important person. 12% said yes. By 2005, that number had skyrocketed to 80%. Psychologists have seen narcissism scores rise by 30% in just 2 decades. The desire for fame has exploded. In 1976, fame ranked 15th out of 16 life goals for young people. By 2007, 51% reported that being famous was one of their top goals. This constant focus on Adam 1 turns us into what Brooks calls shrewd animals. We become crafty, self-preserving creatures who are good at playing the game of success. We spend all our time cultivating professional skills, but we have no idea what gives life meaning, so we don't know where to direct those skills. Years pass, and the deepest parts of ourselves go unexplored. We might be busy, but we have a vague anxiety that our lives lack ultimate significance. So how do we fight this? How do we build our Adam 2? Brooks says we can't do it by following a simple 7-step program. Instead, we have to look back and rediscover an older moral tradition, a way of life that was more common in the past. He calls it the crooked timber tradition, from a famous line by philosopher Immanuel Kant. Out of the crooked timber of humanity, no straight thing was ever made. This tradition starts with a simple, humbling idea. We're all deeply flawed. We're born with a tendency towards selfishness, pride, and self-deception. Character isn't something we're born with. It's something we build through a lifelong struggle against our own weaknesses. In this view, the central drama of life isn't the external climb up the ladder of success. It's the internal struggle against our own demons. To understand what this looks like in real life, Brooks doesn't give us abstract rules. He gives us stories, because, as he says, example is the best teacher. Moral improvement happens when we come into contact with people we admire and find our hearts warmed, and we start to unconsciously mimic their way of being. One of the most powerful examples he gives is the story of Frances Perkins. Her journey shows us a different way of finding our purpose, not by looking inward, but by being summoned by the world outside. Perkins was born in Boston in 1880 into a traditional New England family, earnest, honest, and not afraid to confront a child with her limitations. When she was 10, her mother took her to a hat shop and picked out a simple, three-cornered hat. "There, my dear, that is your hat," her mother said. "You have a very broad face. Never let yourself get a hat that is narrower than your cheekbones, because it makes you look ridiculous." This kind of brutal honesty was meant to build character, to make a person aware of their own weaknesses so they could work on them. Perkins went on to Mount Holyoke College, where this same philosophy was applied to her education. Her professors didn't just look for her strengths. They identified her moral weaknesses and sought to correct them. A Latin teacher diagnosed her laziness and forced her to drill grammar for hours until she wept with frustration, an experience Perkins later said was the first time she became conscious of character. She was terrible at chemistry, so her advisor hounded her into majoring in it, on the theory that if she could master her weakest subject, she'd be tough enough for anything life threw at her. This education didn't just teach her facts, it ignited her moral passions. It taught her that a well-lived life isn't about avoiding struggle, but about throwing yourself into it. After college, she became a social worker, lobbying to end child labor. She was on a conventional path, perhaps toward a respectable marriage and a life of good works. But on March 25, 1911, everything changed. She was having tea with friends near Washington Square Park in New York when they heard a commotion. They ran outside and saw a fire blazing on the top floors of a nearby factory, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. As she stood on the sidewalk below, horrified, she saw what she first thought were bundles of fabric being thrown from the windows. Then she realized they weren't bundles. They were people. Young immigrant workers, mostly women, trapped by the flames, were jumping to their deaths. The firemen's nets couldn't hold them. The bodies ripped right through. Perkins and the other onlookers screamed, "Don't jump!" But it was no use. One young man tenderly helped 3 young women onto the windowsill, holding them out away from the building before letting them drop. He kissed a 4th, held her out, and dropped her too. Then he jumped himself. The horror of that fire, which killed 146 workers, left a deep mark on the city and on Frances Perkins. There was a collective sense of guilt. People realized they had gone about their lives, callously indifferent to the suffering of the people around them. As Perkins remembered, it was as though we had all done something wrong. It shouldn't have been. We were sorry. Mea culpa, mea culpa. For Perkins, what had been a career turned into a vocation. The moral indignation she felt set her on a completely different course. Her own desires, her own ego, became less important. The cause itself became the center of her life. She threw herself into the rough and tumble of politics, willing to compromise and work with corrupt officials if it meant preventing another catastrophe, like the Triangle Fire. This is a crucial point. Today, commencement speakers tell us to find our passion, to look deep inside ourselves to figure out our purpose. That's a life that begins with the self and ends with the self. But Perkins found her purpose through a different method. She didn't ask, "What do I want from life?" She asked, "What does life want from me? What are my circumstances calling me to do?" Her life was not created. She was summoned by it. The important answers weren't found inside her. They were found outside in the concrete problems of the world she was thrown into. As novelist Frederick Buechner put it, the question is, at what points do my talents and deep gladness meet the world's deep need? This is the essence of a vocation. A career is something you choose for financial and psychological benefits. A vocation is a calling you feel you have no choice but to answer. Your life would be unrecognizable without it. Perkins became an instrument for the job that had been put before her. She molded herself to the task. She went on to work in New York politics, learning how to deal with the tough, old-school male politicians of Tammany Hall. She even changed her style of dress, adopting somber black dresses and a matronly demeanor to remind them subconsciously of their mothers, a tactic that she found worked. Her personal life was filled with hardship. Her husband, Paul Wilson, suffered from severe mental illness, leaving Perkins to support the family and spend decades visiting him in asylums. Her daughter, Susanna, also inherited a manic temperament and suffered from depression her whole life. Perkins bore these burdens with a quiet New England reticence, rarely speaking of her private pain. She believed that private emotions were too intricate and precious to be paraded in public. This stoicism served her well when she was appointed by Franklin D. Roosevelt as his Secretary of Labor, the first woman ever to serve in a U.S. cabinet. She became one of the key architects of the New Deal, central to the creation of the Social Security system, the minimum wage, and the abolition of child labor. She served Roosevelt for his entire presidency, a testament to her steadfastness and loyalty. But it wasn't easy. She was often unpopular with her male colleagues in the press. In 1939, she faced impeachment proceedings over a controversial labor leader, and FDR, to his shame, didn't rise to her defense, letting her hang out to dry. Through it all, Perkins soldiered on, drawing strength from her inner convictions. She was aware of a fragility within herself, knowing that if she ever let go of the tight hold she had on her emotions, she might disintegrate. She found solace in silent retreats at a convent, where she realized a profound truth. You should do good works not for the gratitude of the poor, who are often ungrateful, but for God. If you do it for God, you will never grow discouraged. Frances Perkins. Life was a summoned life. She didn't choose it, she responded to a call. In surrendering her own desires to a cause larger than herself, she found a purpose that defined and fulfilled her. Her story illustrates one path to character. But what if your biggest obstacle isn't an external crisis, but the battle within your own soul? For that we turn to the life of Dwight D. Eisenhower, a man who spent his life trying to conquer himself. Eisenhower's mother, Ida, was a remarkable woman. Her childhood was a series of catastrophes. Her parents died when she was young, and she was sent to live with relatives as an assistant cook. But she was filled with spark and drive. At 15, she packed her belongings and ran away to enroll herself in high school, something almost unheard of for girls at the time. She was tough, optimistic, and deeply religious, and she raised her 5 boys on a steady diet of Bible verses and maxims like sink or swim and survive or perish. Young Dwight, or Ike, had an explosive temper. When he was about 10, his older brothers got to go trick-or-treating, but his parents told him he was too young. He flew into an uncontrolled rage, ran outside, and began pounding his fists against an apple tree until they were bloody and torn. Later that night, his mother came to his room and sat with him. She quoted a verse from the Bible, "He that conquereth his own soul is greater than he who taketh a city." She told him that hatred was a futile thing that only injures the person who harbors it, and she warned him that of all her boys he had the most to learn about controlling his passions. Eisenhower never forgot that conversation. That idea, conquering your own soul, became a central theme of his life. The moral world he grew up in was based on the idea that we're all dual in nature. We have a sinful side that is selfish and self-deceiving, but we also have a side that is made in God's image and seeks virtue. The essential drama of life, in this view, is the struggle to build character by defeating the weaknesses inside us. This requires a deep awareness of what our ancestors called sin. Brooks argues that this is a word we've lost, and we need to reclaim it. Sin isn't just about eating a decadent dessert. It's our perverse tendency to mess things up, to favor short-term pleasure over long-term good, to put our lower loves above our higher ones. When you tell a piece of gossip at a party, you're putting your love of popularity above your love of friendship. That's a sin. To be aware of sin is to be a moral realist, to know that we're all built from crooked timber. Ike was a moral realist in a secular way. He was rambunctious and rebellious at West Point, ranking near the bottom of his class in discipline, and that terrible temper was always there, just under the surface. His aides knew the telltale signs of a coming explosion, the twisted cord-like temple arteries standing out on the side of his head. But he waged a relentless, lifelong war against it, He developed what Brooks calls a capacity for noble hypocrisy. He put on a false front of sunny, boyish ease. He was not an authentic man in the modern sense. He was a passionate man, living under a system of artificial restraints. He learned that to lead, he had to project confidence, even when he was racked by anxiety. He developed little tricks to manage his anger. He'd make lists of people who offended him, or write an offender's name on a piece of paper and drop it in the wastebasket, a symbolic purging of his hatred. He knew, as he wrote in his diary, that anger cannot win. It cannot even think clearly. For 20 years after World War I, his career stagnated. He was stuck as a lieutenant colonel, watching his civilian brothers become far more successful. He was a classic organization man, learning to master procedure, teamwork, and logistics. He learned to subsume his own desires for the good of the group. The proper place for a soldier, he wrote, is where he is ordered by his superiors. This long, frustrating period of serving others turned out to be the perfect training for his ultimate test. When World War II came, his ability to repress his own passions was his greatest strength. He became a masterful commander precisely because he could suppress his own frustrations to keep the Allied coalition together. He passed credit for victories to his subordinates and was prepared to take all the blame for failure himself. He famously wrote a note to be released if the D-Day invasion failed. If any blame or fault attaches to the attempt, it is mine alone. Like Perkins, Eisenhower built an artificial second self. Today we believe in being ... which usually means being natural and untutored. But Eisenhower's code held that a personality is a product of cultivation. The true self is what you build from your nature, not what you start with. As president, he was willing to appear tongue-tied or even stupid to conceal his true designs. His simplicity was a work of art. His life shows us the power of self-conquest. But what about those times when life brings us suffering we didn't choose and can't control? For that, Brooks turns to the tumultuous and inspiring life of Dorothy Day. Day was born with what she called a passionate, ideal nature. From a young age, she was hungry for a transcendent purpose, for something heroic she could sacrifice herself for. Her childhood was lonely. Her father was distant, and her family was unaffectionate. She sought solace in religion, becoming, in her own words, disgustingly, proudly pious. As a teenager, she was torn by the conflict between flesh and spirit. She was thrilled by her budding sexuality, but also taught that it was evil. "I am working always, always on guard," she wrote in a letter, praying without ceasing to overcome all physical sensations to be purely spiritual. After 2 years of college, she moved to New York and fell in with a bohemian, radical crowd that included playwright Eugene O'Neill. She became a heavy drinker, a barfly, and promiscuous. Her life was a mess. She had an abortion at the request of a lover, an experience so painful she never mentioned it in her memoirs. She attempted suicide. She was arrested during a suffragist protest and went on a hunger strike, an ordeal that left her feeling the, quote, futility of human effort and her own self-deception. Looking back, she saw this period of her life as a form of pride, an attempt to make her own laws, to live beyond good and evil. But beneath the chaos was a deep spiritual hunger, a feeling of loneliness that wasn't just about being alone, but about being spiritually isolated. She needed a deep and total commitment to something holy. She thought she might find it in romantic love. She fell for a man named Forster Batterham, and they lived together on Staten Island. She loved him passionately. But even in the midst of their love, she felt a longing for more. In 1925, she became pregnant, and she was thrilled. When her daughter Tamar was born, she was overwhelmed with a flood of love and gratitude, and she felt a profound need to thank someone. No human creature, she wrote, could receive or contain so vast a flood of love and joy. With this came the need to worship, to adore. This was the beginning of her transformation. She began to feel hunted by God. Her attention turned to the Catholic Church, not because of its theology, which she knew nothing about, but because of its people, the poor Catholic immigrants whose dignity and generosity she had witnessed. This created a terrible choice. Batterham was a committed atheist and would never marry her or consent to have their child baptized. Choosing God meant losing the man she loved. "I do love you more than anything else in the world," she wrote to him, "but I cannot help my religious sense, which tortures me unless I do as I believe right." She chose God. The conversion process was a dreary, joyless affair. As she went through the sacraments, she felt like a hypocrite, betraying her radical friends and going over to the side of a powerful, reactionary institution. But she persevered. And then she found her true vocation. In 1933, in the depths of the Great Depression, she started a newspaper called The Catholic Worker. It became a movement. They opened a soup kitchen that fed 1,500 people a day. They sponsored hospitality houses for the homeless, and Day herself lived in them, sharing the suffering of the people she served. Her life was an example of what Brooks calls the redemptive power of suffering. When most of us think about the future, we dream of happiness. But when we look back on the events that truly formed us, we usually talk about the ordeals. We shoot for happiness but feel formed by suffering. Suffering does several things. First, it drags you deeper into yourself, smashing through the superficial floors of your soul and revealing hidden depths. Second, it gives you a more accurate sense of your own limitations, shattering the illusion of self-mastery. Third, it can lead to a call. You stop asking, "Why me?" and start asking, "What am I supposed to do now?" The right response to this kind of pain, Brooks says, is not pleasure, it's holiness. It's redeeming something bad by turning it into an act of sacrificial service. Day's life was about turning her own brokenness into a source of healing for others. She lived a life of chosen suffering, and in doing so found a joy deeper than happiness. If Perkins shows us the summoned life, Eisenhower the conquered life, and Day the surrendered life, then George C. Marshall embodies the institutional life. He shows us how character is built through discipline and loyalty to something larger than oneself. Marshall was not a brilliant boy. He was a terrible student who lived in fear of being laughed at. His older brother Stuart tried to persuade their mother not to let him attend the Virginia Military Institute, fearing he would disgrace the family name. Marshall overheard this conversation, and it lit a fire in him. "I decided right then," he recalled, "that I was going to wipe his eye." At VMI, he found a culture that fit him perfectly. It was a culture of chivalry, stoic self-control, and honor. It taught him reverence for heroes like Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson, giving him an ideal to measure himself against. And it taught him discipline. He arrived sickly with typhoid fever and was hazed mercilessly. In one ritual, he was forced to squat naked over a bayonet until he collapsed, suffering a deep wound. But he never reported his tormentors, and this staunch silence won him the respect of the entire Corps. He learned that change happens from the outside in. Through the act of drill, you become self-regulating. Through the expression of courtesy, you become polite. The act precedes the virtue. He learned to separate emotion from action, to distrust his feelings. He became deliberately austere and undramatic, scorning the theatricality of generals like Douglas MacArthur and George Patton. He refused to keep a diary, believing it would make him too focused on himself and his own reputation. For years, his career was marked by disappointment. He was such a brilliant staff officer and master of logistics that his superiors kept him from getting a combat command. But he served his institution, the U.S. Army, with selfless devotion. He embodied what Brooks calls the, quote, institutional mindset. In our age, we distrust large organizations and prize individual freedom. We think of ourselves as rebels and disruptors. But an institutionalist sees life differently. You're born into a collection of permanent institutions. The army, the priesthood, a profession. Your job is to commit to one, accept its rules and standards, preserve it, improve it, and pass it on to the next generation. In subordinating yourself to an institution, you become who you are. The customs of the institution structure your soul. Marshall lived this code. His moment of greatest self-denial came during World War II. He was the Army Chief of Staff, the organizer of victory, and everyone assumed he would be given the ultimate command, Operation Overlord, the D-Day invasion of Europe. It was the job he craved more than anything. President Roosevelt knew that if Marshall asked for it, he would have to give it to him. But Roosevelt also relied on him in Washington. FDR called Marshall into his office and beat around the bush before finally asking him if he wanted the command. If Marshall had just said yes, the job and the glory would have been his. But he refused. He told Roosevelt to do what he thought was best for the country, insisting that his own private feelings should have no bearing on the decision. "Well," Roosevelt said after a long silence, "I didn't feel I could sleep at ease if you were out of Washington. Then it will be Eisenhower." It was the greatest professional disappointment of Marshall's life, and it came about because he refused to express his own desires. He put the institution before himself. That was the code he lived by. This kind of dignity was also the hallmark of another great leader, a Philip Randolph, who showed how quiet self-mastery could become a powerful weapon in the fight for civil rights. Randolph was born in Florida, the son of an AME minister who preached a quote, racial religion, reminding his flock of black heroes like Frederick Douglass. The family lived in highly respectable poverty, with an impeccable home and a strict code of propriety, discipline, and etiquette. His parents taught him perfect elocution, to pronounce every syllable of every word. Confronted by humiliating racism, they responded with a moral refinement and gentlemanly conduct that was a world apart from their circumstances. Randolph carried this dignity with him his entire life. His posture was always perfectly upright. His voice was soft, deep, and serene. He was famously incorruptible, turning down a lucrative city job to continue his unpaid work as a labor organizer. Even when he was globally famous, he rode the bus home and had only $1.25 in his pocket when he was mugged. This inner dignity made it impossible to humiliate him. His internal state was determined by himself, not by the racism around him. He began his career as a radical socialist, but his great work began when he was asked to organize the Pullman Porters, the black men who served on luxury railway cars. It was a brutal 12-year fight. Union members were fired and beaten. By 1932, membership had plummeted, and Randolph was being evicted from his office for not paying rent. But he persevered, and in 1937, the Union won a historic contract, one of the longest and most bitter labor fights of the century. Randolph's greatest tool was his manner, his quiet authority, but he also understood power. In 1941, with the country mobilizing for war, defense plants were hiring droves of workers, but not black ones. Randolph called for a massive march on Washington to protest the discrimination. President Roosevelt, alarmed, summoned him to the White House and tried to charm him into calling off the march. "Phil, you know I can't issue an executive order for you," FDR said. "I couldn't do anything unless you called off this march." "I'm sorry, Mr. President," Randolph replied calmly. "The march cannot be called off." He bluffed, vowing to bring 100,000 people to the city. 6 days before the march, Roosevelt buckled and signed Executive Order 8802, banning discrimination in the defense industries. Randolph, along with his protege Bayard Rustin, was also a key champion of nonviolent resistance. This wasn't a passive strategy. It was a form of tightly controlled aggression. It was about relentless pressure, forcing opponents to reveal their own villainy by absorbing their violence. As Randolph put it, "I feel morally obligated to disturb and keep disturbed the conscience of Jim Crow America." This required incredible self-discipline. Bayard Rustin's life was a dramatic struggle to achieve that discipline. Raised by his Quaker grandmother, he was brilliant, athletic, and possessed the same preternatural dignity as Randolph. He was also openly gay at a time when that was incredibly dangerous. He became a star of the pacifist movement, staging acts of civil disobedience that became legendary. He went to prison as a conscientious objector and continued his protests inside, being brutally beaten for sitting in the whites-only sections. But Rustin had a reckless side. He was arrogant, angry, and relentlessly promiscuous. This was a profound contradiction in a movement that demanded its leaders be peaceful and self-purifying. His mentor, A.J. Moost, wrote him a brutal letter in prison, telling him there is nothing to respect in the self he had been, and that he needed to find his true self, quote, through fire, anguish, complete, and childlike humility. Rustin's journey was a long, painful process of learning to move from the spotlight to the shadows. After a second arrest in 1953 for a sexual encounter, his reputation was shattered. He slowly understood that his role was to serve the cause from the background. He became the brilliant strategist behind the scenes, the man who tutored Martin Luther King Jr. on nonviolence and organized one action after another, asking that his own name be left out of the history books. His ultimate achievement was organizing the 1963 March on Washington, the dream Randolph had conceived 2 decades earlier. He was the master organizer, but his name was not on the marquee. Randolph was the official director. After King's "I Have a Dream" speech, Rustin found Randolph, and as he recalled, "I looked into his eyes, and tears were streaming down his cheeks. It is the one time I can recall that he could not hold back his feelings." The lives we've looked at show us different paths to character, through vocation, self-conquest, suffering, discipline, and dignity. But what about love? For that, Brooks tells the story of one of the greatest novelists in the English language, George Eliot. Born Mary Ann Evans, she was a needy, awkward, and magnificently ugly girl, hungry for an affection she never received from her mother. She threw herself desperately at a series of men, only to be rejected time and again. Her early life was a drama of emotional neediness. But she was also intellectually brilliant. After a period of intense and priggish religiosity, her wide reading led her to lose her Christian faith, a brave and scandalous act for a woman in Victorian England. This put her on a lonely path, but it was the beginning of her finding her own inner agency, her own criteria for how to live. Her transformation came when she met George Lewis. He, too, was an outcast. A writer considered superficial, famously ugly, and trapped in a messy open marriage where his wife was having children by another man. They were 2 lonely, brilliant people who found in each other a soulmate. They fell in love over ideas, drawn to the same authors and the same search for a moral life outside of traditional religion. They made a courageous decision to live together as husband and wife, even though Lewis could not legally get a divorce. It was a brazen act of adultery in the eyes of the world. Polite society shunned them. Her own brother cut her off and never spoke to her again. She paid a fearsome price, but she had found her one true love, and it redeemed both of their lives. Love, Brooks explains, is a force that reorients the soul. First, it humbles you, reminding you that you're not in control of yourself. You don't build love, you fall in love. Second, it decenters the self. You become more interested in the beloved than in yourself. The distinction between giving and receiving disappears. Third, it gives you a poetic temperament. You stop calculating costs and benefits and surrender to a magical, inexplicable power. And finally, love impels you to service. It arouses a great energy and desire to care for another. Lewis's love for Eliot was the perfect example of this. He knew her talent was far superior to his own, and he felt nothing but selfless delight in it. He encouraged her to write fiction. He was her first reader, her agent, her editor, and her fiercest protector, shielding her from any negative criticism that might shake her fragile confidence. He put himself second so she could become the great novelist George Eliot. Their love transformed them. "It was the prime blessing," she wrote, "that has made all the rest possible to me." Through this love, she moved from a self-absorbed adolescent to an adult with an unsurpassed ability to enter into the feelings of others. The quality that made her novels so profound. Her great theme became sympathy, the direct fellow feeling with individual fellow men. She came to believe that moral progress happens not through grand, abstract schemes, but through the small, daily acts of kindness and tolerance within a family, a marriage, a town. The growing good of the world, she wrote in her masterpiece Middlemarch, depends on the, unhistoric acts of those who live faithfully a hidden life. Her own life was a testament to that. She found her purpose not in some grand crusade, but in the disciplined work of her art and the steady love of one man. All of these stories point to a similar truth. Character is built through a struggle against the self, through surrender to a cause, through the discipline of an institution, or through the transformative power of love. The final and perhaps greatest explorer of this inner landscape was St. Augustine. Born in North Africa in the 4th century, Augustine was a brilliant and ambitious young man. His pagan father wanted him to have a glittering career. His Christian mother, Monica, was a formidable and relentless force, determined to save his soul, a love so possessive he once had to trick her to get on a boat and escape her influence. As a young man in Carthage, he was, in his own telling, in love with love. His life was a cauldron of illicit passions. "I rushed headlong into love, eager to be caught," he wrote in his Confessions. But this wasn't love for another person. It was a selfish desire to be loved. It was lust. He took a common-law wife for 15 years, had a child with her, and then, at his mother's urging, callously dismissed her to marry a 10-year-old heiress who would advance his social standing. On the outside, he was a massive success, climbing the meritocratic ladder of the late Roman Empire, becoming a celebrated professor of rhetoric in Milan, the center of imperial power. But inside, he was a wreck. He felt fragmented, tossed to and fro, his soul boiling off in all directions. He was famished for inner food. He realized he was living an arduous life that gave him no real nourishment. He had desires that didn't lead to happiness, yet he kept following them. He responded by undertaking a deep excavation of his own psyche, and what he found was a vast, chaotic inner cosmos beyond his control. He saw that he was divided against himself, that part of him wanted good, but another part was perversely drawn to evil. The famous story of stealing the pears as a teenager illustrates this. He and his friends stole them not because they were hungry, but simply for the thrill of doing wrong. "It was foul, and I loved it," he wrote. "I loved to perish." This, he realized, is the nature of sin. It's not just a mistake, it's a disordered love, a desire for the wrong things. He came to see that the core of his problem was pride. Not just the boastful, arrogant kind of pride, but the deeper pride of believing you can be the author of your own life. The belief that through your own willpower and effort, you can achieve your own salvation. This, he concluded, is a delusion. Our reason is too weak, our desires too disordered, our capacity for self-deception too profound. We cannot save ourselves. The solution, he realized, was not to try harder, but to surrender, to renounce the idea that he could be the captain of his own life, and to open himself up to an outside force. This led to his famous conversion scene in a garden in Milan. Torn by inner conflict, weeping under a fig tree, he heard a child's voice chanting, "Take up and read. Take up and read." He opened the Bible to a passage from Romans, "Put ye in the Lord Jesus Christ, and make not provision for the flesh." At that moment, he felt a light flood his heart. The struggle was over. He had surrendered. This wasn't just about giving up his career or sex. It was an elevation. He was renouncing a lower set of loves for a higher one. He was acknowledging that he couldn't order his own inner world. Only God could. And this surrender opened him up to what he called grace, God's unmerited love. Grace, Brooks explains, isn't something you earn. It's a gift. And when you truly accept that you are accepted, loved not for your achievements but just for being, an immense feeling of gratitude fills you. And that gratitude awakens a powerful desire to love back, to serve, to delight the one who has given you this gift. This is a different theory of motivation. It's not driven by ambition, but by gratitude. Dependency on God in this view doesn't lead to passivity. It breeds incredible energy. Your desires slowly change. You start wanting the things that will delight God, not the things that will delight yourself. You become what you love. Augustine's story is the ultimate U-shaped journey. He had to descend into humility, to admit his own weakness and need. before he could rise to a life of cohesive purpose as one of the most influential thinkers in Western history. Each of these lives offers us a piece of a lost vocabulary, a way of thinking about how to build the Adam 2 side of our nature. They teach us that the road to character is not a smooth upward climb. It is a bumpy, winding path, often leading down into valleys of humility and struggle before ascending to the heights of strength and peace. It's a road that requires us to look outside of ourselves, to a calling, an institution, a beloved, or a God, to find the strength to conquer the weaknesses within. It's a road that is less traveled today, but as these stories show, it is the one that leads to a life of depth, meaning, and a quiet, unshakable joy. As we've journeyed through these incredible lives, from the quiet dignity of George Marshall to the fiery inner struggles of Augustine and Dorothy Day, you might be feeling a sense of distance. These people feel like giants, living in a different moral country, playing by a different set of rules, and in many ways they were. They lived in a world that gave them a rich vocabulary to think about the inner life, words like sin, grace, redemption, and vocation. It was a world that understood that the most important battles are not fought on the fields of business or politics, but within the confines of our own hearts. We have, as David Brooks argues, accidentally left that world behind. We're not worse people, but we have become morally inarticulate. We live in the culture of the big me, a culture that relentlessly tells us to focus on our Adam 1, our careers, our achievements, our external selves. The result is an imbalance. Our external muscles are strong, but our internal ones are weak. We know how to build a resume, but we've forgotten how to build a soul. So what do? How can we, living in this hyper-competitive, self-promoting, social media-driven world, begin to walk that old road to character? We can't turn back the clock, nor should we want to, but we can consciously build a counterculture in our own lives, one that reasserts the balance and reminds us that Adam 2 is, in the end, more important than Adam 1. The lives we've explored give us a blueprint, what Brooks calls a humility code. It's not a set of easy steps, but a series of propositions to orient our lives around. First, it begins with understanding that we don't live for happiness, we live for holiness. This doesn't mean you have to be religious. It means recognizing that a truly meaningful life is a moral drama, a struggle for purpose and virtue, not just a quest for pleasure. Second, it requires an honest look at our own nature. We're flawed creatures. We have a natural tendency toward selfishness and pride. Humility isn't about thinking less of yourself. It's about having an accurate assessment of your own weaknesses. It's knowing you're an underdog in the fight against yourself. From this perspective, life becomes a series of daily moral occasions. The central drama isn't about getting a promotion. It's about the inner campaign against your own deficiencies, your envy, your pride, your laziness. This struggle isn't a burden. It's what gives life its meaning and shape. And here's the beautiful, paradoxical part. You cannot win this fight alone. We're not strong enough. We need what Brooks calls redemptive assistance from outside, from family, friends, traditions, institutions, and for believers, from God. We have to put ourselves in a state of dependence and affection. This is what leads to those U-shaped moments of grace. Life knocks you off course. You hit a failure, a loss, a moment of crisis. In that moment of retreat, you surrender your ego, you admit your need, and something floods in to hold you up. It could be the love of a friend, the kindness of a stranger, or a sense of divine presence. You just have to accept the fact that you are accepted. This is the humble path. It's a path of stumbling. We will all stumble through life, a little off balance, sometimes falling to our knees. But the beauty is in the stumbling, in recognizing it, learning from it, and helping others as they stumble alongside us. We're not solitary heroes. We're a community of flawed but beautiful stumblers, holding each other up. So how can you start walking this path today, in a simple, practical way? First, take 10 minutes and think about your eulogy virtues. Not what you want to achieve, but who you want to be. Write down 3 of them: kindness, courage, honesty. Then, think of one small, concrete thing you can do tomorrow to practice one of them. The act precedes the virtue. Second, pick one weakness you know you have: a short temper, a tendency to gossip, a habit of procrastinating. Don't beat yourself up about it, just acknowledge it. And, like Eisenhower, devise one small strategy to work on it. Maybe it's putting a note on your desk, or taking a deep breath before you speak. The goal isn't to win, it's just to get better at waging the struggle. Finally, practice what George Marshall did, and perform a sacrifice play. Do something for your family, your team, your community, and consciously decide not to take credit for it. Do it quietly, for the good of the group, not for the applause. Feel what it's like to serve something larger than your own ego. These are small steps, but they're the beginning of a different way of living. They're the first steps on the road to character. That was a summary of The Road to Character by David Brooks. We've touched on the main ideas and stories today, but I'll be completely honest with you. A summary can only ever be a map. The real journey, the real transformation, happens when you walk the terrain yourself. The true magic is in the quiet moments when you're reading, and a single story or a simple phrase connects with something deep inside you in a way you never expected. This summary is here to help you decide if this is a journey worth taking. If anything we've talked about has struck a chord, I encourage you to pick up a copy of the book. Reading it isn't just about learning. It's an experience that can genuinely change the way you see yourself, your struggles, and your life. A link to the book is in the description below. Also, if you found this summary valuable and want to continue exploring the world's most powerful ideas, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. That way, you won't miss our next deep dive into another life-changing book. Let's keep learning and growing together.